welcome to Chore Chapters, because everyday tasks need good company. I'm Leo, and with me as always, we have got Luna.
Hey everyone, I hope you're all doing well. Today we've got a thrilling and interesting story lined up, so grab your headphones and let's dive straight into the story.
Some stories just stick with you. They kind of reverberate long after you first hear them. The name John Wayne Gacy probably rings a bell for many of you. A really chilling figure in true crime history. But what if I told you his story isn't just about, a monstrous individual, but actually a stark, unsettling look at how the very systems designed to protect us can utterly fail.
Indeed. Yeah, the Gacy case, horrific as it was, it offers these profound lessons. It really serves as a kind of historical mirror.
A mirror? How so?
While reflecting the systemic vulnerabilities in public safety and information sharing really of its time. And it's those very lessons, actually, that have spurred critical efforts in modern interagency coordination, trying to prevent such failures from ever happening again.
Right. So today, we're taking a deep dive into a stack of your sources. We've got everything from gripping biographical accounts of Gacy's life and crimes, all the way to detailed research on how our public safety agencies are learning or trying to learn from the past. Our mission here is to really extract the most important nuggets, helping you understand not just what happened, but crucially, why it matters for how public safety operates today.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's unpack this. John Wayne Gacy, before he was widely known as the Killer Clown, he cultivated this chillingly normal facade. What was it about his early life, his activities, that let him blend in so effectively?
Well, what's truly fascinating here, I think, is how Gacy almost weaponized normalcy.
Weaponized normalcy.
Wow.
Yeah. He meticulously built this reputation, pillar of the community, leveraging that outward trust. And this, combined with certain, inherent biases within the system back then, made it incredibly difficult for any early alarms to be taken seriously.
But the system itself was sort of susceptible. In a way, yes. Think about it. He was, for a short period, a mortuary attendant. He observed embalming. And later he confessed to this deeply disturbing act, climbing into a coffin with a teenage male body. He even claimed to have engaged in necrophilia there, saying bodies were just dead things that couldn't tell anybody.
That's incredibly disturbing. And yet outwardly.
Exactly. Outwardly, he then pivoted to this seemingly conventional career path. Graduated from Northwestern Business College, became a management trainee, a salesman. He got engaged, was super active in the local JCs, even rose to vice president and was named, I think, the third most outstanding JC in Illinois. Just blending in.
That's a powerful point about weaponized normalcy. And then he moved, right, to Iowa.
That's right. Moved to Waterloo, Iowa, took over several Kentucky Fried Chicken restaurants for his father-in-law.
Seems like he continued embedding himself deep in the community there, too, even while his private behaviors were getting more sinister.
Absolutely. In Waterloo, he opened the sort of club in his basement, mostly for his male employees.
A club?
Yeah, where he'd give them alcohol, make advances, often dismissing them as just jokes or, tests of morals.
Wow.
And his wife had 2 children during this period. Gacy actually described it as perfect. He thought he'd finally earned his father's approval. He also stayed incredibly active with the JCs there, providing fried chicken at meetings, insisting they call him Colonel. Got recognized again. Outstanding vice president in '67.
So it just highlights how deeply embedded he was in these, normal community structures.
Exactly. Despite the growing darkness of his private life.
And this pattern, this manipulation, it continued even when he faced legal trouble, didn't it?
It absolutely did, even during his incarceration in Iowa for sodomy.
Economy, right?
He rapidly acquired this reputation as a model prisoner, became head cook, dramatically increased the inmate JC chapter membership. He even supervised projects like installing a miniature golf course, earned a Distinguished Service Award. It really speaks to his ability to just manipulate perceptions, even in a controlled environment like prison.
Yeah. Incredible. So he eventually returned to Chicago, he remarried, but it sounds like his carefully constructed normal life started to unravel a bit then.
Yeah, by 1975, that second marriage was definitely unraveling. He told his wife he was bisexual, basically said a Mother's Day sexual encounter would be their last time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And she started finding things, gay pornography, men's wallets, ID cards in the house. She saw him bringing teenage boys into his garage late at night, and when she asked, he just got angry, said it was none of her business.
But publicly,
Yeah.
still keeping up appearances.
Oh, absolutely. Despite all that, he became the self-made building contractor, PDM contractors, and even a Democratic precinct captain. He later speculated his political stuff might have been like an attempt to antagonize his father.
Interesting.
And of course, the chilling part, he performed as Pogo the Clown or Patches the
With
Clown
that clown persona.
at children's parties, charity events, hospitals. He later remarked to detectives, clowns can get away with murder. That's where the Killer Clown nickname came from.
So he's building this outwardly respectable life, PDM contractors, precinct captain, charity clown.
Yeah.
But internally, his behavior is just getting more and more predatory. What else did his business practices reveal? You mentioned PDM contractors.
Yeah, his business essentially became another hunting ground for him. He would proposition his young male employees for sex or demand sexual favors in exchange for loans or promotions. Real exploitation. He also claimed to own guns, told one employee something like, "Do you know how easy it would be to get one of my guns and kill you, and how easy it would be to get rid of the body?" Just pure intimidation.
And this led to the crawl space.
Yes. By 1978, the crawl space under his house at 8213 West Summerdale Avenue, it reportedly had no more space for bodies. That forced him to start disposing of victims in the Des Plaines River.
So this pattern emerges. Exploiting trust, leveraging authority, preying on vulnerability.
Exactly. It just underscores how his whole dual life was maintained by a system that, frankly, wasn't set up to connect these disparate pieces of information. It allowed a mobile predator like him to operate for far too long.
Which brings us to Robert Piest. What was it about the disappearance of this 15-year-old on December 11th, 1978, that finally forced the system to confront its failures?
That really was the critical turning point. You see, unlike many of Gacy's previous victims, who were often runaways or maybe from marginalized communities,
Groups that sadly didn't always get the same immediate attention back then.
precisely, Robert Piest was different. He was popular, well-liked, had a strong, engaged family who absolutely refused to accept any kind of dismissal from authorities.
And they knew he was meeting Gacy.
Yes, Piest's mother knew. Gacy had visited the Neeson pharmacy where Piest worked, talking about a remodeling deal. Gacy mentioned his firm paid teenage boys $5 an hour, which was almost double what Piest was earning.
Ah, the lure.
Right. Piest told his mother he was meeting Gacy about a potential job, left the store around 9 p.m. to meet him, and was never seen alive again. That difference, the strong family pushing, the clear connection, it galvanized the investigation in a way the earlier disappearances often hadn't.
So the police, led by Lieutenant Joseph Kozenczak, finally started looking closely at Gacy. What'd they uncover?
Well, the Des Plaines police, they quickly connected Gacy to Piest's disappearance. A criminal background check finally surfaced the key info.
What did it show?
It revealed Gacy had an outstanding battery charge in Chicago and, crucially, that he had been imprisoned in Iowa for the sodomy of a 15-year-old boy, the Iowa connection.
Finally. And when they confronted him?
Well, when police first visited Gacy, he tried to downplay it, claimed he'd only talked about remodeling materials with Piest, maybe came back for his appointment book. He was adamant, absolutely adamant, he hadn't offered Piest a job.
And his reaction when asked to come to the station?
Just chilling manipulation. He apparently asked them, "You guys are very rude. Don't you have any respect for the dead?" Trying to turn it around.
Unbelievable. What happened when they finally searched his property? The crawl space.
The search of the crawl space. That's when the true horror unfolded. They discovered human remains. Not Piest's initially, but then a second skull, a third, a fourth. It just confirmed the massive, terrifying scale of the murders.
And Gacy confessed.
Eventually, yes. He confessed to murdering approximately 30 young males. He claimed they'd entered his house willingly, said they were mostly teenage male runaways or male prostitutes.
Minimizing again?
Exactly. He even admitted he only dug about 5 graves himself. He often had his own employees dig the remaining trenches, just telling them it was for plumbing or construction, so he'd, quote, have graves available.
Just methodical horror.
And he'd planned to cover the entire crawl space with concrete in January 1979, right before he was caught. He even chillingly stated later that he should never have been convicted of anything more serious than, quote, running a cemetery without a license.
Wow. So, looking at the big picture here, Gacy's case is obviously more than just a shocking true crime story. It really profoundly exposed these fundamental systemic blind spots, didn't it? These design flaws in the criminal justice system of the 70s.
Precisely. I mean, think about the lack of technology. There was no national integrated criminal justice database back then.
Right. Nothing like we have today.
Nothing. Iowa's parole records were largely separate from Illinois' police records, making a comprehensive criminal history check incredibly difficult, almost impossible to do quickly.
And the communication between agencies.
That was another huge issue. Information sharing between states, even between departments within the same state, was just cumbersome. It relied on manual processes, phone calls, maybe faxes, mailed documents. This created, perfect blind spots for a mobile predator like Gacy to operate in.
And you mentioned societal bias earlier.
Yes, and we have to acknowledge that. There was arguably a prevailing societal bias at the time that Gacy's typical victims, young men, often on the fringes, hitchhikers, guys looking for work, maybe those frequenting areas known for male prostitution, were seen as somehow less innocent or maybe less deserving of immediate, intense investigation compared to, say, Robert Peace.
That's a hard truth.
It is. But these failures, these combined failures, they directly led to critical reforms. You see the establishment of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC, in 1984.
Okay, so some good came from this horror.
And significant improvements in police training, protocols for missing persons investigations. Lessons were learned, slowly, painfully.
That's a powerful, definitely sobering look back. The Gacy case starkly illustrated the devastating costs of these fragmented systems, these silos. So this brings us to a crucial question. How have public safety agencies learned from these kinds of devastating failures? What strategies are being used now to ensure these coordination gaps don't let future threats materialize, especially in, say, public safety emergency response?
That's an excellent question, and it transitions us perfectly into the second half of our deep dive here. There's a comprehensive research study conducted by RTI International, funded by the National Institute of Justice, that examined exactly this.
Okay.
It looked at strategies for interagency coordination, specifically in the US, the UK, Canada, and Ireland, and particularly in response to terrorism threats, but the lessons are broader.
And the goal was?
The goal was really to identify what stood in the way, the barriers, and what actually worked, the promising practices.
Okay, so let's dive into those barriers first. What did this study find were the common hurdles? The things preventing effective coordination, especially between, say, law enforcement and public health agencies.
Right. The study basically categorized them into four main areas. First up, cultural differences.
Culture clashes.
Big time. There was often this palpable sense of disdain, almost, between the agencies. Public health often saw law enforcement as a very rigid, command and control, while law enforcement sometimes viewed public health as a roadblock to their investigations. Just fundamentally different ways of operating.
I can see that. Different priorities.
Exactly. And there was a lack of appreciation among public health folks for, say, preserving the integrity of physical evidence at a scene, and conversely, concern among public health officials about violating public trust if they partnered too closely with law enforcement. Plus, just a basic lack of clear protocols for sharing sensitive info.
That makes sense. Different mindsets, different missions almost clashing. What about the more formal challenges? Like legal stuff, structural issues.
Yeah, that was the second category. Legal and structural challenges. Issues like a lack of clarity among federal, state, local responders about who's actually in charge, the chain of command.
Always a potential issue in a crisis.
Always. Plus existing legal barriers and just inherently different agency structures that don't naturally mesh.
Okay. Culture, structure. What else?
Communication barriers. This was a big one. A lack of common language.
Like using the same words but meaning different things.
Precisely. Terms like case or surveillance could mean vastly different things in a law enforcement context versus a public health context. Huge potential for misunderstanding.
I hadn't thought of that.
And also, the inability sometimes to develop a joint message for the media. That can cause public unrest or even compromise sensitive investigations if different messages are going out. They cited the 2005 anthrax scare at the Pentagon's mail facility as an example. It exposed gaps because officials just didn't communicate effectively across all the necessary federal and local agencies.
Right. Unified message is key. So communication breakdown. And the last category, you mentioned 4.
The last one was leadership. Or sometimes the lack thereof.
Leadership.
Yeah.
Always crucial.
Absolutely. Challenges in just sustaining the commitment of key executive leaders, legislative leaders. Political interest can wane,
But just get cut, priorities shift.
Exactly. There was often insufficient national direction from the federal level on how coordination should work, how it should be funded. Agencies also naturally experience competition over control of policy space, over limited budgets. They can actually become rivals when they're seeking funding from the same limited sources.
Fighting over the same pot of money.
Right. Plus, agencies naturally tend to focus on the most immediate, proximate problems rather than planning for rare but potentially high-impact events like terrorism. It's human nature, organizational nature.
That's a lot to unpack. When you talk about agencies competing for funding and policy space, it sounds almost like an economic theory playing out.
That's a great observation. It really does touch on what's known in political science as the social choice problem, the inherent difficulty of coordination when you have essentially budget maximizing bureaucrats.
Budget maximizing bureaucrats.
Yeah, I mean, agencies, by their nature, are often wired to protect their turf, their funding, their mandate. They might even try to, quote, invade policy space held by a rival agency if the perceived value or, importantly, the funding for an issue suddenly increases.
Like after 9/11 or the anthrax attacks.
Exactly. We saw that with the huge surge in bioterrorism funding after the 2001 anthrax events. Suddenly, agencies that maybe weren't focused there before saw an opportunity or a need to get involved. It's a natural tendency, but one that needs to be actively managed for true collaboration to happen.
Wow, that really paints a complex picture.
Yeah.
The cultural clashes, the legal hurdles, communication breakdown, leadership issues, even bureaucratic competition. But the study also identified promising practices, right? So what solutions are actually helping agencies overcome these deep-seated challenges? How do we build those bridges?
Absolutely. It wasn't all negative. The study found some really effective strategies. For tackling those cultural issues, the liaison model emerged as highly promising.
Liaison model, what's that?
It's where personnel are actually assigned to work within other agencies for a period.
Embedding them.
Exactly.
Right.
It fosters that cross-fertilization of ideas, builds personal relationships, trust, and leads directly to increased access and better information sharing. People know who to call. Also, just having strong personalities in leadership positions, real champions, was found to be key in fostering successful partnerships, people who just make it happen.
Makes sense. What about the legal and structural stuff? How do you fix that?
There, the solution is really about formalizing relationships and communication networks, developing detailed plans before a crisis hits, running regular interagency exercises. As one law enforcement official memorably put it in the study, you don't want to learn how to dance at the party.
That's good. Practice beforehand.
Precisely. It's also about practical things, like securing top-secret security clearances for relevant public health and medical professionals so they can access classified threat information, and developing clear written agreements, memorandums of understanding, or MOUs between public health and law enforcement. These agreements have to respect confidentiality laws like IPAY.
That's the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, right? Patient privacy.
Correct. So the agreements have to respect IPAY, but still create pathways for vital information to be shared legally when it's necessary for, say, terrorism prevention or public safety.
That's smart. Building the infrastructure, the muscle memory for cooperation before you need it. And for communication, getting everyone on the same page, using the same language.
Yeah, for communication, establishing a single joint agency spokesperson for the media proved incredibly successful in case studies. They highlighted the London bombings response, where a unified voice provided a constant stream of credible information and really helped calm the public.
Instead of conflicting reports.
Exactly. And crucially, developing that common language, a shared glossary even, for first responders. Making sure surveillance means the same thing to everyone involved, even internationally, to avoid those dangerous misunderstandings in high-stakes situations.
Okay, common language, joint spokesperson. And finally, leadership. How do you ensure strong leadership and sustained commitment?
Well, the importance of strong leadership at the agency or department level was crystal clear. Leaders set the tone. Maintaining political saliency is also vital. That means linking preparedness efforts, like for terrorism, to broader health and economic priorities that resonate with politicians and the public year-round.
Making it relevant beyond just the rare event.
Right. A successful example they mentioned was the Ford County, Kansas Agro-Terrorism Initiative. They involved local beef industry representatives as liaisons.
Interesting. Why?
Because it directly connected the public health and law enforcement efforts to the region's absolute economic lifeline, the beef industry. It showed tangible benefits of coordination beyond just abstract threats.
Smart. Grounding it in local reality.
Very smart. And finally, establishing a clear lead agency during a response is critical for effective hierarchy and decision-making when things are moving fast. Someone has to be in charge.
Hmm. This all raises a really important question for all of us looking forward. How do we as a society strike that balance? The critical need for comprehensive information sharing for public safety versus legitimate concerns about individual privacy and data confidentiality, especially in our increasingly interconnected world.
That is the crucial question, isn't it? Finding that equilibrium and maybe even taking it a step further. How can the lessons we've learned here about overcoming these systemic coordination challenges in public safety, how can they be applied to other really complex multi-agency problems we face today? Things like, climate change response or even future global pandemics.
What an incredible deep dive this has been. We've really journeyed, haven't we? From the grim historical reality of John Wayne Gacy's crimes, illuminated by those systemic failures, the fragmented data, the societal biases, all the way to these modern proactive efforts being made now to build more robust, collaborative public safety systems.
It's definitely a powerful reminder that knowledge, well, it's most valuable when it's actually understood and applied. The Gacy case showed us, in stark terms, the devastating cost of a lack of coordination. And this contemporary research, it provides a pretty clear roadmap, or at least the start of one, for improving public safety through better communication, stronger legal frameworks, and decisive, committed leadership.
Yeah. Ultimately, I think this exploration really shows us that fostering trust, breaking down those institutional silos, it isn't just some nice ideal, is it? It's a fundamental requirement for a safer, more prepared society. So the question for you listening is, what new insights will you take from this deep dive and maybe explore next?
Thanks so much for listening, everyone. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, share, and subscribe. It really helps us out. Until next time, take care and keep your chores company.